We're in for a great time tonight. This afternoon, really. We've got a wonderful series of panelists up here to talk about monsters. Some of them are going to be talking about the monsters that are living right inside of your very own bodies. Very scary. Some of them are going to talk about the relevancy of some of the monsters that we see in the movies. But to get us kicked off, we're going to talk to Thomas Kearns, who has been the one that put this entire event together. And he's going to give you a little demonstration on what ebooks are. Included in that, he is giving away some free copies, and this is a first-come, first-served basis of some ebooks of some classic stories that you guys might want to hear. I've already got hands going up. We've got Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Frankenstein, the audiobook, and The House of Souls, which Thomas has told me is the one to get. So on your way out, make sure you do grab a copy of these, and then you can listen to them as you're driving through town in your cars in your nice little costumes and your own monsters, which I've realized Halloween has become the time of really slutty monsters. So if you've chosen to go that direction, then all the more power to you. Okay, and so I'm going to hand this over to Thomas. Let's give him a rousing welcome.
Good question. I was just wondering that too. I today wanted to talk to you a little bit about these ebooks that we have, and it's kind of a plug for a program that is on every single computer here at TMCC, and it's also free to all students. So I want you to understand that not only will you be using this program to have these books read to you, you can also have your own textbooks read to you. And if you need more information about that, come up and see me after the program today. I'll sign you up, help you. We'll get your email, set up an appointment later on, and I'll actually get a program sent to you so that it's put on your own home computer. But first I'll demonstrate what the program is. I have this put on the disk in two different ways. One is, of course, in an MP3, and that's simple enough. You just open it up on your computer. And if you listen real carefully, actually I'd have to switch out the sound. This would be playing to you the book, in this case, Frankenstein. And then on the other side of that, like I said, on every single computer here at TMCC, there's a simple program called Premiere. And it's as simple as pointing at it and then clicking Read. It then reads out loud to you. This will do the same thing with your textbooks. And built into this program is a 250,000 word dictionary. All you need to do is double click on it. So afterwards, when this program's over, if you're interested in learning about this and having it on your own home computer, see me. But also, we have 40 some books that are back there, first come, first serve, and please come on up and get them. I'll go ahead and hand this back off to John.
Wow, isn't that exciting? I mean, really, someone's going to read to me. It's like bedtime. How exciting. So, again, pick up those books on your way out. You can hear some of those old stories, listen to them in the car. I know for myself, personally, I used to commute 45 minutes here every single day, and one of the best ways to pass that time was getting caught up on ebooks. That way I could pretend that I read the book. Okay, so we have a lovely panelist of guests. Our first one is Professor Hugh Fraser, and he's going to go ahead and examine the vampires and the history in literature and movies. How many of us love vampires? I know, yeah, see, right? And how many of us think that Twilight damaged that completely and totally? Yes, me too. I totally agree with you on this. So let's hope Hugh's going to go ahead and clarify some of the real myths behind vampires. Hugh?
Thanks a lot. The two most famous characters in literature and movies are Dracula and Sherlock Holmes. The number of movies and books written about those two characters is unbelievable. Not just in English, but in French, German, you name the language, they've written the books, and they've written the poems, they've written everything. So when you're dealing with vampires, you're dealing with a never-ending character that has gone on through centuries, literally. I'm going to talk a little bit about, so you have some background on this. A lot of the movies really don't give you this background. In terms of Western civilization, okay, that would be Middle Europe, Russia, the United States, that grouping of countries. What you run into is there was a fella that was in history everybody's probably familiar with named Vlad Dracul or Vlad Tepes. And these two people, one was the son and one was the father, they lived between 1428 and 1476. And they are sort of the historical characters that began the sort of vampire tales. It's what Bram Stoker and the various writers based a lot of their characters on, were these two particular characters in history. And where did they live? They lived in Serbia, Transylvania, Romania, the country basically of vampires. The thing that was very interesting is this. Between 1672 and 1756, in Middle Europe and in Russia, there was something called vampire hysteria. Now, we're familiar with that because we have something called Ebola hysteria in this country, right? Well, they had vampire hysteria. And one of the reasons they believed vampires existed, aside from the fact that there was a historical context for them, is because of the disease tuberculosis. Nobody knew what tuberculosis was. They knew you got sick. They knew you laid in bed and faded away. You had no energy. Your blood supply was depleted, and you eventually expired. So we always try to explain throughout history why things happen. That's called mythology. Okay? So what they did is, to explain these, cases of tuberculosis, they invented vampires. The vampire is the one that's responsible for it. Now, you might say to yourself, well, how do you become a vampire, right? Well, we all know you become a vampire by getting bitten, right? But here's some of the other ways vampires came into existence. If you ate meat that was killed by a wolf, you would become a vampire. Okay? If you were a crazy person, you were probably a vampire. If you committed suicide, you would probably turn into a vampire. And if, for sure, if you were involved in witchcraft, you would be lined up with becoming a vampire. Now let me ask a question here. How many people in here have tattoos? Well, there's a few. So let's count yourself lucky. If you were living in the Middle Ages, you'd all be burned at the stake. For sure. They'd seek you out and burn you at the stake. If you had a birthmark, if any of you have birthmarks, you're gone. You're burned at the stake. That's how superstition replaced science. Okay? Because the science wasn't there to figure out all this stuff. There was even vampire hysteria in Russia that swept Russia. So what happened out of this hysteria, a conversation began. Like, do vampires really exist or don't they exist? So in Germany, there was a whole group of scholars that said, nah, not vampires. They probably don't exist. But then there was this French priest by the name of, Dom Auguste Calmet. And he wrote a book about this because he started investigating all these hysterical outbreaks in Middle Europe and stuff. And what happened was he wrote this book and he basically said, vampires probably exist. So all these other people that said vampires didn't exist faded away, and his book became the preeminent book. His book is the one that everybody looked at and read. And so with that book, in those days, as soon as you would write, it's not like today where there's millions of books. A book then was rare. I mean, you had and write it out and everything. So if you wrote a book on vampires and said they exist, that becomes like gospel. That becomes like gospel. So the bottom line is, between the hysteria, tuberculosis diseases, and other folklore beliefs, okay, this concept of vampires suddenly took hold, took root, and became real. Now, a lot of you are probably saying, "Yeah, but today they don't believe in vampires today, right?" Wrong. They do believe in vampires today. Now, how do I know this? Check the burial rituals in Hungary, in Transylvania, in Romania, in Russia. Here's the way they go. Somebody dies of an unexplained disease or commits suicide. The belief is they're a vampire. But they give them a burial, but they only bury them 6 inches below the ground. And so when everybody leaves the cemetery and goes back to celebrate or whatever, there's always about 5 or 6 people that return to the cemetery and dig up the corpse. And you know what they do? They cut its head off, stuff it with garlic, and then place the head right down here so the head can't see the body. And then, depending on the different traditions, put the Eucharist or the host from the Catholic Church, and then they ring the coffin with it to maintain the vampire in the grave. Now, on some cases, if you go to certain cemeteries, you will see a spike sticking clean out of the ground, spiked right into the grave. And you know what that means? That means there's a vampire there, and the vampire has been staked to the ground. But then you have novelists, right? These are great. They do a fantastic job of telling us about vampires. If lightning happens to strike the stake and shatter it, then the vampire can rise out of the earth. So between the history, between the arguments, and between novelists, are you kidding me? We got vampire legends and folklore and books and poems and everything you can conceive of on every conceivable level. It's incredible. The vampire as a character in history is just unbelievable. There isn't anything like it. We're talking also about famous authors. Alexander Dumas, the famous French writer, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, John Keats, Percy Bysshe Shelley, Mary Shelley, all these people, Lord Byron, all these great poets and stuff from England, they all wrote about vampires. And because they were authority figures in their civilizations, when they write about it, it means something. It's not like if I wrote about it, nobody cared. But in those days, those people, when they wrote about it, it really meant something. Now, in 1897, the first silent vampire movies were made, which some of you probably have seen, called Nosferatu. It was made in Germany. And the character in that vampire drama was terrible. I mean, it was this corpse that rose from the dead and looked like hell, had these big long teeth, and was real stiff and walking around. But what happened is, that image of the vampire changed when Bram Stoker wrote his famous book, Dracula. Okay? Because he transformed the vampire from this sort of walking corpse, right, into this sort of aristocrat. This person of history who knew things, and it was very seductive and everything. So the whole image of the vampire changed over time as novelists got a hold of this legend. In 1931, that's when Universal Studios made the famous movie Dracula with Bela Lugosi. And that's when, "Good evening, allow me to introduce myself. I am Count Dracula." That voice, that Romanian, Serbian voice became one of the trademarks of the vampire, that particular voice, and that movie was responsible for that. Now, in 1954, the comic books banned Dracula from comic books. Again, as religious influences and so forth banned, the use of vampires in comic books. They were, they still wanted to do Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse and that kind of stuff, and they didn't want to permeate the comic book world with vampires. But like all good things, things change. So along comes Marvel comic books, right? And they eliminated the ban in a sense and began their comic books about Dracula and about vampires. This is one type. There was one called Tomb of Dracula and so forth. So the comic books then reared their heads up and started writing stories about vampires. Now, these are great books, man. I love these things. You get them in there, they're just phenomenal. This is a collector's item. You can't buy these in the stores, but they're really, really awesome. Okay, so in 1972, and I remember this, I'll never forget it. I was sitting there watching TV, and they kept running these ads for this vampire movie. And boy, I was looking at it, and man, this looked cool. This is going to be a cool movie. These ads and this movie that shocked the television world. It was called The Night Stalker. It was made in 1972, and it was the most watched movie of all time on television at that point, which just unleashed the interest in vampires. All those little ads they ran about the movie and stuff, they played it totally straight. And the setting was Las Vegas, which is an amazing place for vampires. If I asked you guys the question, why Las Vegas, I think you could tell me the answer. Because women are walking around all hours of the night, right? Just ripe for vampires. They had one scene in that movie, which was really a fantastic scene. This woman, they had her on a street in downtown Vegas, and she was walking, and she was hitting her heels were clicking on the cement, so there's this little click, 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 click. And then she turns this corner, goes into this alley, right? And then she goes to her car, and she turns back, and all of a sudden, she sees this guy. Okay, you don't see the guy in the picture, and then she's really confident. She's totally confident. She opens the door of her car and unleashes a Doberman Pinscher, who flies towards this, what is a vampire, and within 3 seconds in this movie, all you hear is the squeal of the dog and its neck breaking. And then of course the girl was like totally terrified, and the whole scene went down quickly. But the point I'm trying to make is they made that movie totally straight. No funny stuff, no cheap humor, anything like that. They made the movie like it was the real thing, like a vampire that invaded Las Vegas. And again, like I said, that in 1972 was the biggest movie that ever hit television. And from then on, boy, people said, hey, just like movie people, let's start making vampire movies, because they're going to bring in the cash. And they do. Let's talk a little bit about the powers of the vampire and stuff. The vampire can direct. Now, what I'm giving you is the classic stuff, not the new stuff. All the new fiction writers change everything. The vampire can walk in sunlight when that wasn't the case. And so they changed everything. But what I'm giving you is the classic sort of vampire profile here. He can direct the elements. That means he can direct the weather, the wind, and so forth. He can command what they call the meaner things. He can command the rats, the owls, the bats, the moths, the foxes, and the wolves. So he can control all of them.
Actually, original Dracula, he could walk in the sunlight for just weeks.
Pardon?
Original Dracula could walk in the sunlight for just weeks.
Okay. He's talking about the original Dracula could walk in the sunlight. If you do the historical study of Dracula, you see every conceivable mythology working. That's true. There are some early stuff. That's true. Then it got changed. Now, what I'm kind of sort of going off what Bram Stoker put together in his book Dracula. That was sort of the centerpiece for developing the character. But if you go back in history and you look at it, the history is immense. All these characters, all these different things that could happen. In fact, if you go back in history, you can go back to ancient Greece. You can go back to old Rome. You can go back to Egypt. You can go back to China. You can go back to India. So all those places had vampire legends and stuff in various degrees and forms. He can vanish or grow small, the vampire. He's 20 men strong. In other words, 20 men. That's how strong the vampire is. He's cunning. He can be a mist, or he can change into a wolf, or he can even change into dust. Okay? And he goes on for all time, unless he's staked to the ground. Now, this theory where when you look in the mirror, you don't see the vampire. The mirror is the symbol of soul. Okay, that's a symbol of that's been around for decades, ages. And so when the vampire cannot have a reflection in the mirror, basically says the vampire has no soul. That's the whole mirror mythology. And if you look at the original Dracula movie, when Van Helsing, he says, "I have something very strange to show you," and he pulls out and he opens this thing up and it's got a mirror in it, and then Dracula goes like that. That's where the mirror idea came from, and he put it in the movie. He throws no shadow, okay? He can grow younger. And his power, according to at least the traditional vampire legend, his power ceases in the day, and but it increases in the night. And of course that has changed over the years. They've done lots of different things with that. The blood thing came from a quote in the Bible. There's the biblical quote called, "For the blood is the life." That's directly out of the Bible. And so, the fiction writers and so forth, being very smart, they took that quote from the Bible and they used it to make the vampire a bloodsucker. Now, let me say this. The original ideas of a vampire wasn't necessarily a being or an entity that sucked your blood. The vampire also was someone who, let's say, wasn't a bloodsucker, but drained your psychic energy, drained the life force out of you, and left you weak and helpless. And there were many short stories written just on that particular theme, other than the bloodsucker theme. So what this really means is, if you visit a marriage and family therapist and you're married, really all you have to do is determine the husband or the wife, which one's the vampire. Which one is sucking the psychic energy out of the other one. Because that's really what's going on. You don't need all these fancy psychology terms and psychological disorders and DM1, 2, 3, 4. Hey, it's just about vampires. Is the husband the vampire or is the wife the vampire? Because one of them is sucking the energy out of the other one. And that's why they're there, to get therapy, to figure that out. So that goes way back in history, that whole idea of the vampire, not just the bloodsucker, but somebody who drains the energy out of somebody. Now, I thought this was funny. I hadn't seen this one in a movie, but they said if you had a black dog and you put two eyes on top of the other two eyes of the black dog, that would scare the vampire away. I'm not sure exactly how that works, but that was something I came across that was kind of funny. Certainly garlic is going to get rid of the vampire because of the smell of the garlic. The crucifix is something. This is where Stoker introduced Christian elements. He was really smart. Okay, you had the theory of the vampire, you had the history of the vampire, but let's take the Middle Ages. We had the witchcraft, we had the Inquisition, we had all these kind of things. Okay, so let's introduce the Catholic Church and all its little, instruments and beliefs and stuff into it, mix it up with the vampire mythology, and create a really interesting novel. So he came out, and that's how the Vampire Hunter's Kit was formed. The little Vampire Hunter's Kit, it was a little box that opened up, that flipped shut. It had a stake in it, a rope, a mallet, a crucifix, and sometimes holy water, and sometimes a host. And priests would carry it around, going out into the countryside, literally looking for vampires, and to use their little kit. Okay? The sacred bullet would kill the vampire. Running water. They didn't like running water, the vampire. But you could counter the running water thing by taking the soul out of the shoes of the vampire and putting Mother Earth into his feet, into his shoe. And so when he walked around, he would have the earth from his homeland in his shoes, and the running water then wouldn't bother him. Because one thing that gave him and restored his life was the fact that the earth from Transylvania would sustain him. That's why in the original movie, there are 50 boxes brought from Transylvania full of earth from Transylvania and Romania and so forth like that, so the vampires could sleep in it at night and restore their energy. Okay, so obviously that's what they did in the book. They looked for these coffins that had that earth in it, and they would destroy the coffins and eliminate, scatter the earth to the winds, and so the vampire would have nowhere to sleep. Okay. Again, most of this stuff is either from folklore or it's from fiction writers creating something. Now, every good antagonist has to have a protagonist, okay? And so the protagonist for the vampire, at least in Stoker's book and other ones, was Dr. Van Helsing, okay? And Dr. Van Helsing was a non-conventional doctor of supernatural wisdom. Why? Because traditional science could not fight the vampire. You needed somebody outside the realm of science to fight the vampire. And in this book by Bram Stoker, which was very popular during this time, was hypnotism. So you'll see in this book, hypnotism is used quite a bit. And Van Helsing uses hypnotism in order to see if he can find and contact Count Dracula. It's kind of like a chip, a little chip to sort of figure out where he is, a little homing device. Well, they used that instead of having a homing device in those days. They used hypnotism to try to go through the woman in this case who was bitten by the vampire and see if through her consciousness you could find out where the vampire was. So again, it's not science versus the vampire. It's supernatural science versus the vampire. And this was very, very interesting because in England at the time, Victorian England, when this was done, seances were huge. Everybody was trying to contact the dead. Everybody was into hypnotism. So this particular book was ripe for reading in Victorian England when it came out. Also, it was more of a sexually explicit book than many of the Victorian novels and so forth. The implication was there. This is just an aside. I thought it was kind of funny. As far as an erotic vampire, unfortunately, the vampire, Viagra doesn't even work on the vampire. The only thing that the vampire can do is kiss the woman, if it's a male vampire, is bite her neck, and that's how he gets his sexual pleasure. Okay? So you cannot believe the stuff that's out there that they come up with about vampires to create different types of characters. Okay. Now, what I thought myself personally that the movies were dead. I mean, I heard we're going to do another, and they just came out with this other movie, Dracula. Yeah, Dracula Untold, which is based basically on the fact of the Vlad Tep, thing that he's going to protect his people. Right. But in order to protect his people, he has to become a vampire and use all.
The movie controls the elements, and he controls the animals.
Right, and so again, as many times as it's been done, they fall back on the legend a little bit, grab a piece of the legend, create a little bit different story, and with all the CG stuff, with the computer graphics stuff, create this incredible stuff. Did anybody here see the movie that had to do with Abraham Lincoln and the vampires?
Yeah.
Hey, wasn't that cool?
Yeah.
Wasn't that a good flick? It's kind of a sleeper movie. If anybody hasn't seen it, pick it up. It's really got some great special effects in it. And the concept is good. The concept is incredible. The silver in it and the whole idea that vampire colonies were controlling America and stuff. It was, again, novel writers trying to come up with stuff that makes life interesting. Here's a book, 900 pages. It's called The Encyclopedia of the Undead. And it still doesn't have everything in it. So this gives you an idea how much stuff can be out there and written about. Okay? So, I'll kind of end it there. And if anybody has any questions or anything.
I appreciate it.
Are you familiar with the term Strigoi?
Yeah. There's a lot of German terms and Romanian terms and different other terms that you find in here. It's too much trouble even trying to figure out how to pronounce them. But yeah,
That, from what I learned, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's the actual like the term for a real vampire is a Strigoi. Didn't Stoker he came up with the term vampire?
I don't know whether he came up with, Nosferatu was another term that was used for the vampire, the undead and stuff. The problem is that once the fiction writers get a hold of it, they'll use any terminology in folklore that they can use in their novels. If they don't have a myth, they'll create a myth, or they'll marry things up just to make things interesting, and so the thing keeps going. Even Twilight, which really, because of werewolves and vampires. I mean, vampires are really control werewolves, so the movie sort of again broke from the tradition and went into a whole different idea about how to create a story around vampires and stuff. Yeah.
There was a.
Now they want to form a theme. They're trying desperately in Romania to get enough money together to create a theme park built on the Dracula legend around the Dracula castle. Now, I don't think it's completed yet, but they want to make it sort of like Disneyland. And, because they don't have anything to attract people there for tourists, so they want to come up with this idea of, a Dracula Disneyland type thing. So it's a great idea. I don't know if how far along they are on the project or not, but that's been discussed for a few years now.
So if we went to Transylvania or Romania or Hungary, these Eastern European countries today, would we find a lot of evidence? Would we find a lot of people who believed in?
You would find the mythology present. Okay, the mythology would definitely be there. And there would probably be history teachers and different other kinds of people that would be able to talk about it. And then there's tours of Dracula's castle and so forth like that. But it's just like anything else. Nobody talks about it if they actually believe it. Okay? So, but the rituals dictate. I mean, I've got a video at my house. It's just a very modern burial showing what happened. These people still believe. I mean, you're taking a legend that's 4, 5, 6, 7, 800 years old. And this has been passed down by generation and generation. So people do still believe in these things. And a lot of these outlying areas still don't have the science and medicine sort of we do in this country.
Like Tonopah.
Yeah, like Tonopah in the middle of.
Would we find cemeteries where, we might find a stake?
That I don't know, because that thing I referred to was in a fiction book, was in a fiction short story. But it's possible. That's the whole point.
Rural areas, maybe.
The cemeteries and so forth, all that stuff are subject to these kinds of folklore, mythology, and so forth. And so you're definitely going to find some stuff. And you get, Bram Stoker had a famous line, which I think is a great line. He said, "The dead travel fast." That was his line, that the vampire can move that fast. He's so quick and so fast. And that was sort of, they came up with these little lines about vampires and so forth. And creating even modern mythology about the vampire. But I don't think it's going to end. I think you're going to see more vampire movies. I don't think. There was even a show on TV about a year ago called Dracula. Did anybody see that one? I thought it was pretty good, actually. It wasn't too bad. It just vanished, though. I don't know what happened. It didn't. I guess it got canceled. Didn't get the audience.
Actually,
Yeah.
no, it was a show series that was a one-season thing. That
Oh,
was it.
okay. Okay. So anyway, that's all about vampires.
Looks like we do have one more question back here.
Oh, I was going to ask you, how did the Cold War, the sphere of apocalypse and mutations impact the whole Dracula thing, or did it?
Well, any war, any famine, because Vlad, you've heard of Vlad the Impaler? Yeah, I mean, he just staked everybody. All the Turks that came to invade his country, I mean, he just staked them all. I mean, ISIS is small time compared to some of the stuff that went on in those days in Romania and stuff in the 1400s and 1500s. I mean, seriously, yeah. Anytime you have war, anytime you have anything like this, you're going to have. There's a line, which I think is this is what's interesting. There's a line in this new movie, an advertising tagline, that says, Men do not fear armies or swords, but they fear monsters.
Yeah.
And so if we could get a couple of vampires, we could fix the Middle East pretty quick. Because they may not be afraid of our guns and bombs, but I'll guarantee you, if there's vampires running all over the place, they're running for the hills.
And they're in that right region. They're right there. They're real close to Turkey and Hungary. They're right in that region.
Exactly. Okay?
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Huey. We appreciate that. So that's pretty fascinating, isn't it? Just hearing the true history behind where all of these legends came from. Next up, we have one of our part-time instructors for humanities. Oh, she's a tenure track. You're a tenure track? Nice. So we have a tenure track instructor. Jen Huntley. Yeah, get it straight, John. Come on. Pull it together, man. Okay, and she's going to get up and she's going to talk a little bit about Frankenstein, Godzilla, and the nuclear Pacific. How many of you think that the nuclear waste and what's going on over in Japan might be affecting the fish that are coming out of the sea? Yeah, me too. I'm scared of that. I'm waiting for Godzilla to come and terrorize San Francisco. Okay, so let's welcome Jen up to the stage.
Hi. Sushi, anyone? Just kidding. Yeah. Okay, so today I'm going to talk just briefly about what I always say. I'm going to talk briefly, and then I run now. So don't take me seriously now. Anyway, creature discomforts. What monsters remind us about being human? And this comes back around to the fact that I work in the humanities department, and I believe very passionately in the role of humanities, but it turns out that I'm not alone in history or in the history of our culture. So let's take a look at a few other examples. Famously, as we always like to say, it was a dark and stormy night. Cue the thunder. Thank you.
No, it's not on. Wait, it's on.
When a very young Mary Shelley, 18 years old, sat around a large empty vacation home with a bunch of other writers, Percy, her lover, her sister's lover, Lord Byron, and waited out a very, very cold, wintry summer in Geneva by telling each other ghost stories. Now, Mary Shelley went on to be a very well-known and very respected feminist writer for the rest of her life. In fact, very unique among women in the 19th century. She supported herself and her son through her entire life with her own writing, and always writing about feminist causes. So she was very well known in her day as a writer, as a professional, as a speaker. But how do we remember her through the ages? Her creation and variations of her creation. Yeah. All coming down to us through popular culture. Always, we talk about this creation as the monster, right? But Mary Shelley never uses the word monster in her book to talk about the creature. She calls him the creature. But the most famous, and in my opinion, best popular culture version of this. Oh, we need sound. Can we get sound?
Pause it quick.
Pause it. I don't even see my ability to pause. We need some sound.
Go up this view.
Where? Here we go. What do you guys think? Louder?
Yes, louder.
Are you ready? Brothers and sure, this is how they did it? Yes, it's all written down in the note. Now tie off the kites and hurry down as fast as you can. What's the hurry? there's the possibility of electrocution. Do you understand? I say there's a possibility of electrocution. Do you understand?
I understand. Why are you shouting?
Did you tie off the kites? Oh. All right, good. Check the generator.
Yes, master.
Igor, release the safety valve on the main wheel.
Yes, master.
Can you imagine the brain of Hans Delbrück in this body?
Oh, magic.
This is the moment. Well, dear, are you ready?
Yes.
Elevate me.
Now, right here?
Yes. Raise the platform.
Oh, the platform. Oh, that, yeah.
From that fateful day when stinking bits of slime first crawled from the sea and shouted to the cold stars, I am man. Our greatest dread has always been the knowledge of our own mortality. But tonight, we shall hurl the gauntlet of science into the frightful face of death itself. Tonight, we shall ascend into the heavens. We shall mock the earthquake. We shall command the thunders and penetrate into the very womb of impervious nature herself. When I give the word, throw the first switch.
You've got it, master.
Get ready. Get set. Go! Throw the second switch.
Not the third switch.
Here's my creation!
Yeah, so that was the pivotal or the high point of pretty much every single version of Frankenstein, including Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein, which is the moment when the Dr. Victor Frankenstein takes on this role of creating life. Now, for Mary Shelley's creature, the story of this creature is the story of science run amok. And we see that story throughout the variations of Frankenstein. But for Mary Shelley, the feminist, this is also especially a story about male hubris. That it's particularly for her this act of male scientists who are taking on a role that women are the ones that are equipped, which is to give life in this world. And she is critical of this. And she her novel, her story, is telling us that only bad things can happen when we step outside the bounds of nature, and specifically step outside the bounds of our humanity. And it's interesting, it's intentional that Mary Shelley tells us this through a novel, through a work of art, through a story, because we are storytelling creatures, and we are people who understand ourselves through stories, and humanists will argue that science and humanities need to be married together in order for us to in order for those two forces to balance each other out. So that is the argument for Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the modern Prometheus. 136 years later, in 1954, or 60 years ago today, not today, but this year, we hear a very similar message coming to us from across the Pacific Ocean. It appears that humanity just can't get the message. Between Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, well, not exactly halfway, but I'm a humanist, so I don't need math. Sorry, just kidding. Halfway between Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and Godzilla's message about nuclear destruction and science run amok, we get the creation of the state of Nevada. That's right. 150 years ago, tomorrow, Nevada was created as a state. As a monster? Well, it was an unholy alliance between industrial greed for the riches and the resources of the West and President Abraham Lincoln's desperate vote counting in the final hours of his nearly failed 1864 re-election bid. But Nevada, also being the site of nuclear testing, has a very strong relationship to the Godzilla story. The original Godzilla movie, created in 1954, 60 years ago, was a critique of the effects of nuclear testing in the South Pacific. And if you ever watch that original movie, that 1954 movie with Raymond Burr in it, it's a very, very clear connection that Godzilla the monster was created by these scientific experiments set off in the South Pacific, awakening a monster that would come out of the deep and looking very similar in many of the movies to a giant tsunami wave, like the one that Japan recently experienced and is probably still pouring nuclear waste into the Pacific Ocean this very day. So all of the military might of modern science couldn't get Godzilla to stop stomping all over Tokyo. All the scientific knowledge can't put that nuclear waste back inside the Fukushima plant. So it's not just fantasy, but it's also, in many cases, reality that these stories play themselves out in horrific and uncontrollable ways. And today, what's the message today, the takeaway? Well, we live in a time when scientific technology is teaching us that we can genetically create a race of superhuman beings. We can, within a generation or two, using genetics, we can pick our strengths and, of course, none of our weaknesses. We have robots that we continue to invest more and more money in smart technologies, and, less and less money in smart students. That is creating a dynamic that a recent and very famous Pulitzer Prize-winning scientist, E.O. Wilson's been around for a long time, but he recently has come out with a book on the meaning of human existence, where he poses this question: do we really want to compete biologically with robot technology by using brain implants and genetically improved intelligence and social behavior? E.O. Wilson, bringing back the messages of Mary Shelley and Toho Enterprises, which created Godzilla, 1954, arguing, I hereby cast a vote for existential conservatism, the preservation of biological human nature as a sacred trust. We are doing very well in science and technology. Let's agree to keep it up and move both along even faster. But let's also promote the humanities, that which makes us human, and not use science to mess around with the wellspring of this, the absolute and unique potential of the human future. That's it. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Do we have any quick questions before we bring up our next guest? Anyone? How many of you remember those old? I know I'm totally dating myself. Yeah, thank you. I'm not alone on that. How many of you remember those Godzilla movies and those TV shows?
You actually fought a creature that was made out of garbage.
Right, and he fought a lot of different creatures. Poor misunderstood soul, Godzilla. He was a hero. No, raising your hand for Godzilla. Yeah, weren't those great? I mean, back then, the high-tech world of film was a lot different. So it was like people playing with little things.
I just want to interject here. I used to argue with my ex-husband that Godzilla, or Gojira, the monster, is female.
It is.
Yes, and it gets outraged once a month and roils out of the ocean for no particular reason, stomps around. You really need to watch out for that.
Yes, men do that too. So, thank you so much for joining us. Some of you have just walked in. Welcome to the Monsters panel. We welcome you guys. This is the second annual. Is that right, Thomas? Second. So yeah, we'll look forward again next year. It'll be fun. We'll get more instructors and professors up here to talk about different monsters and things of that nature. Next up, we've got Joe Hunt, an English professor. Oh, never mind. We've got a change in the venue here. Okay, let's see here. Or a change in order. We have Christine Boston, anthropology instructor. She's here to do a little bit of evidence on Sasquatch. How many of you love Sasquatch? I was just up in the Redwoods like 2 years ago, and I swear every moment I could look for Sasquatch, I was. I felt like it. I was barbecuing and things of that nature, and I was very excited to see my first Sasquatch, and I did not see one. So we were about to find out why. Christine?
Thank you to the English professor who let me go first. I promised my students I would go at 2 since several of them have class shortly. So I don't want to have any of them miss out on this opportunity for their extra credit if they ask me questions. Hint, hint, kids. At the end, Mike. They have to be relevant to Sasquatch, not the class. So, man, I really hate this. So Sasquatch, Yeti, Mambikori, Abominable Snowman, or simply put, Bigfoot. All of these names have been used to describe a creature that is known to have ape and human-like characteristics and identified in cultures and across the globe as well as geographically across the globe, ranging from North American to Australian indigenous cultures. And despite the large quantity of cultural... What are you doing?
He's been doing that all day.
In regards to the large quantity of cultural mythos on this topic, there still remains a debate on whether or not these creatures actually exist. Today's presentation is dedicated to a physical anthropological analysis of the existence of these creatures that I will simply be referring to as Bigfoot-like creatures. Now, many cultures around the globe do have some sort of cultural mythos surrounding these Bigfoot-like creatures. From North American Northwest cultures to Himalayan mountain cultures, we have both cultural and geographical descriptions of these creatures. But they do vary, but we do have some very similar characteristics among all of these different characterizations. Bigfoot creatures are described as being anywhere from 4 feet to 8 feet tall, extremely hairy, and exhibiting human and ape-like characteristics. If I didn't know any better, I'd say that was a couple of my ex-boyfriends. Don't worry, we get along, so they won't get mad at me. Now, many cultures regard these creatures as either being malevolent entities that go out and steal children in the middle of the night and eat them. And other cultures actually regard these as benevolent creatures that actually go forth and are protectors of the earth from humans who would otherwise destroy and dominate the earth. Now, the diversity in stories on Bigfoot demonstrate 2 different things. First, the diversity in cultures around the globe, and second, the different beliefs, values, customs, and needs among all of these different cultures. Now, Bigfoot stories have changed over time, particularly over the last few centuries, and this demonstrates that we as a world are becoming more globalized, and cultures are borrowing or taking from various other cultural norms and values in regards to all sorts of things, in particular Bigfoot mythos, in order to fit their own needs and purposes. And this cultural diffusion is actually the case here in our own Western culture on how we as Americans and Canadians and Westernized individuals in general came to have Bigfoot mythos in our own culture. And it actually came about in the 1800s, which coincides with Western expansion into various parts of the globe. And the incorporation of the Bigfoot mythos was actually not one to scare children, kind of like with other cultures, but one to justify colonization of groups around the world. Explorers, military personnel, and others would go to far-off, unexplored, non-westernized regions of the world and come back with these tales of these large, hairy, ape-like creatures that were dominating the landscape and scaring the local savage and primitive people. And therefore, it was Westerners' responsibility, so to speak, to go about and conquer these lands for these primitive, savage people's own benefit because they couldn't take care of themselves against these Bigfoot-like creatures. Now, from these military personnel, explorers, and others, they came back not just with tales, but evidence of Bigfoot-like creatures. And they came back with a variety of different evidence that I want to focus on first, in particular, footprint evidence, hair, and skin fragments. Now, the majority of these pieces of evidence do exist here in North America as well as on the Asian continent. And here in North America, we don't have any non-human primates that exist here. Although we do have a lot of primates, humans are primates, so that does lend credence to the existence of some sort of creature existing here. As well, North America is the home of our very early primate ancestors. About 65 million years ago, primates actually evolved here in North America, which again lends credence to the idea that a Bigfoot-like creature could potentially exist here, even though we have very little evidence to actually support that, which I'll get to in a second. But in Asia, where we also have evidence of Bigfoot-like creatures existing, the abominable snowman or the Yeti, we do have a plethora of non-human primates existing. In particular, the golden-headed langur, which is pictured on the right, and the orangutan, pictured on the left. And I bring up both of these species in particular because a lot of individuals who say they've actually seen a Yeti or a Bigfoot-like creature on the Asian continent have actually seen one of these guys, orangutan or golden-headed langur. So we have evidence that demonstrates that even though we have people who say they've seen it, they've actually seen one of these guys. And if you're from a foreign land and never seen an orangutan or golden-headed langur before, you might think, oh my God, I've run into a Bigfoot based on the tales you've heard. Kind of like in the middle of the night, if you are home alone and you just watched a scary movie, you're going to think Jason or Freddy Krueger is in the house to kill you. It doesn't necessarily mean it's true, but we can at least understand why people are coming to these conclusions. Now, in regards to the other pieces of physical or natural evidence, in regards to Bigfoot hair or skin samples, a lot of those early explorers and military personnel did have actual physical, quote-unquote, proof of Bigfoot remains in the form of skin and hair. And prior to scientific advancements, everyone kind of took it as with a grain of salt, saying, yeah, okay, this is true. Why would we question this? But with recent technological advancements, particularly with DNA analyses, we've actually been able to rule out that any of these things actually belong to unknown or Bigfoot-like creatures. They've actually recently came out with a study from Oxford University, and they have said that a lot of those hair samples come from either wolves, bears, raccoons, horses, porcupines, and many other different creatures. And the quintessential key piece of evidence has always been this quote-unquote Bigfoot scalp. That actually belongs to a bear. It's not Bigfoot at all. So we have known DNA associated with these samples. So if we had come back with unknown DNA, that would suggest and support the idea of Bigfoot, but everything's coming back of known animal DNA. So that right there is already casting some doubt on the existence of Bigfoot. Now, the final piece of physical or natural evidence I want to talk about is the existence of Bigfoot footprints. We have several thousand different footprints that have been found throughout North America and Asia, both pictured and molded with casts. And the sheer volume would seem to suggest that Bigfoot is real. That is, if they were all real, legitimately provided or created footprints. Several of these Bigfoot footprints vary in length and width and general morphology, which is general shape. Now, a lot of scholars and individuals who say Bigfoot is real say, hey, this is evidence that we have multiple different types of Bigfoot. Female Bigfoot, male Bigfoot, fat, skinny, tall, short, children, adult, etc. But we also have individuals who also say that this is also evidence of these being faked. And we know this because we've had people who have come forward saying, oh, I did that Bigfoot print, and I'll show you how I did it. And then they show us, and it matches several of the footprints that they said that they did do, and then we compare those to other, quote-unquote, Bigfoot footprints, and we can say pretty accurately and pretty sure, with great certainty, that a lot of the footprints have been faked. Those that haven't been verified as fakes, either from people coming forward or from just comparison of the fake prints with quote-unquote Bigfoot prints, have been associated with other animals and erosive processes, such as a bear or a wolf, and then natural erosive processes actually expanding or compounding that footprint. You can think about it when you're out in the snow walking around. As the snow melts, that footprint will start to get bigger. The same logic applies here if you put a footprint in mud or in the ground. Now, the most damaging piece of refuting evidence against the footprint evidence recently came from a scholar who wasn't even attempting to enter into the Bigfoot debate. Jeremy De Silva is a physical anthropologist who looks at human morphology, human shape, and he was doing a study on just locomotion patterns in humans, meaning how we walk. And his study was looking at locomotion patterns of people coming into the Boston Museum of History, and he was looking at how people were walking and how their feet were working. And what he noticed is that one of the things that is quote-unquote quintessentially diagnostic of Bigfoot, which is a mid-tarsal break, which is pictured at the top here. This is a mid-tarsal break. It basically occurs when a pair of joints that lack this, have the lack of mobility that we see in bipedal feet. Basically, it's an extra joint that causes you to bend your foot an extra way, which actually hinders bipedal or 2-foot locomotion patterns. A lot of people said we see this in Bigfoot prints, and it's not something we ever see in humans because it's not biologically adaptive for us to have this mid-tarsal break in order for us to walk efficiently. Jeremy De Silva said we do see it in humans, in particular in very large, overweight, obese humans. And that's in part because the sheer volume of size added to an overweight, obese individual causes the bones to have to reshape and break and create that mid-tarsal break. So that diagnostic piece of evidence that is only seen in Bigfoot is no longer the case. It is seen in humans. So this could be a situation where somebody was just trying to lose some weight, walking around the woods, and all of a sudden their footprint was seen and it was attributed to Bigfoot, which isn't necessarily fair to anybody. Now, due to Bigfoot's human and ape-like characteristics, many scholars, including several physical anthropology scholars, have come forward and said that Bigfoot could be a hybrid that evolved from our hominid ancestors and our ape ancestors, but missed an evolutionary step in becoming fully human, both culturally and biologically. So as such, they've identified several hominid or human ancestors as being the potential ancestor to Bigfoot. And there are 4 hominid ancestor candidates that could be the ancestor to Bigfoot, but I'm only going to focus on one, Gigantopithecus, because this is the one that has most of the support. Now, Gigantopithecus, which is pictured on the left as well as on the right, there's an artistic rendition on the left versus the fossilized remains on the right, was discovered by Professor von Koenigswald, who discovered 2 very abnormally large teeth, molar teeth, which are the back teeth, in China. And he later attributed them to no known hominid or human or primate species, and that therefore coined the term Gigantopithecus. Later, he found other scholars, including himself, found other diagnostic specimens associated with Gigantopithecus, leading to several thousand molar teeth having been found and 4 mandibles, which are lower jaws, having been found. That's all we have for the Gigantopithecus species. And from this evidence, scholars have identified this hominid as ranging in size from 5 to 10 feet tall, being very hairy, as pictured here. Now, scholars have further inferred that Gigantopithecus is either the ancestor to Bigfoot or Bigfoot is a living Gigantopithecus species that exists today. There are, however, some very serious problems with Gigantopithecus. The first of which is that Gigantopithecus as a species is very problematic based on what we have in regards to fossilized remains. Again, all we have are a few thousand, 100,000 or so, 100 to 1,000 molar teeth and 4 mandibles. That, in my opinion, is not enough to really say this is a completely different species, particularly given the definition of height, weight, stature, general morphological characteristics that they have determined for this species. The analogy I use to basically say why this is problematic is when we look at puppies, we oftentimes look at paw size, and we say large paws means large dog, small paws means small dog. But that's not always the case. Ideally, large head would lead to large body, but we have lots of evidence that suggests that's not the case, particularly in puppies, like collies, have incredibly small paws, but very large bodies. And bulldogs, which are very small, stout dogs, have huge paws. So if you were to look at their paws, just their paw prints, you would say, oh, it's a tiny dog that just ran through the woods, versus a bulldog, you would think, oh, a huge dog walked through. That's not always the case. So utilizing very limited skeletal evidence to identify overall body size is incredibly problematic, particularly when in our own hominid ancestors, we have some species that have very large cranial features, particularly Paranthropus genus, and even Neanderthals have very large features in their face, but they're actually very small, topping out at like 4 feet, 4.5 feet tall species. So Gigantopithecus may be a legitimate species, but we can't guarantee that he's 5 to 8 to 10 feet tall, as some scholars are saying. As well, even in humans, juveniles do have very large heads. That's one of the things that is very common in humans. And as we develop, we grow into our heads, hence why babies have such big heads and children have such big heads. Not so much hard-headed in the actual biological sense, but more the social sense. So there's a lot of things that are very problematic with identifying Gigantopithecus as a species, let alone as an ancestor to a creature that may or may not exist, Bigfoot. Oh, what about all the photographs and all the eyewitness testimony and all those things? And the video. We've got several videos of Bigfoot. Thousands of people have come forward, either publicly or anonymously, to say that they have encountered Bigfoot. Hundreds of photos of the creature have been produced, as well as several videos, including this one by Roger Patterson and his partner. Now, these illustrations of the creature in the wild are hailed as definitive proof of Bigfoot and Bigfoot's existence. But the question remains, are they real? Unfortunately, a lot of them are fakes. And we know this because the people responsible for providing that eyewitness testimony, those pictures, those videos, have come forward and said, my bad, I lied. And they've said that they lied for a variety of different reasons, some for money, some for fame, some for attention. But ultimately, they are coming forward and saying they've lied, including Roger Patterson's own family. Roger Patterson passed away in the 1970s and never rescinded the actual video. He went to his deathbed saying it was legitimate, but his children eventually came forward, as well as his spouse at the time, and even his partner who filmed this video, and they all came forward and said, oh yeah, we were all involved, and it was all a fake. There are those, however, who claim that there are still several legitimate pieces of evidence among all the fakes that demonstrate that Bigfoot does exist, but given the sheer number of fakes, that does cast doubt on the whole lot of evidence, as well as the fact that, as John just pointed out, he was just in, where were you, the Redwoods? The Redwoods. I know John. John has a really nice camera, and even if he didn't have his really nice camera, he has a cell phone, which I'm pretty sure has a camera on it. He's nodding, agreeing. If Bigfoot truly did exist, we should all have non-blurry photo evidence at any time, not just from people who say Bigfoot is real. I should be able to go out with my dog at any time and find Bigfoot. And I don't necessarily believe Bigfoot exists, because I'm an avid hiker. I'm constantly outside. I don't have that evidence. And my cell phone's always on me, as my students can attest to how quickly I email them back. Plus, the subjects focused in on these pictures are predominantly solitary and male. Human and non-human primates do not have a tendency to be solitary creatures. We are all, as a general characteristic, primate characteristic, is that we're all social creatures. Very few primate species are solitary creatures. In fact, the only time we ever see that is in the case of a female bonded kin group. That is where males will go off on their own and they'll seek out females to breed with. And we'll see females existing in a group together, usually the main female with her young, until she casts that young out, if it's a male, to go off and find his own mate later. So given the fact that we only see males in these pictures, okay, that could be a female bonded kin group existing in Bigfoot-like creatures, but where are the females in these pictures? Where are the juveniles? In fact, the only time we ever see pictures of female Bigfoots or juvenile Bigfoots is when somebody points that out. And then all of a sudden, conveniently, someone goes, oh, I have a picture of a juvenile. Oh, I have a picture of a female. But very rarely do we see juveniles and females in any of these pictures. In fact, I know of no pictures of a female with a juvenile whatsoever. So this trend does... this actual primate trend that we see in modern primates and in humans, we're not seeing in our Bigfoot pictures and evidence. So that's cast some doubt there as well. Furthermore, scholars have noted that in order for a Bigfoot population to exist in any ecological niche, be that here in the Pacific Northwest or Nevada, because we have some people who say they've seen Bigfoot here in Nevada, or the Himalayan mountains, Australia, anywhere in the world, we would need at least 500 different Bigfoots existing in that population. At a minimum, 500. Again, any one of us should be able to go out into Lake Tahoe and see a Bigfoot and take a really nice picture of it. Not doing that. In fact, I was just in Lake Tahoe in that area the other night. Didn't see a Bigfoot. Saw some drunk people, but not a Bigfoot. So that right there is very damaging evidence as well. So why does the idea of Bigfoot still exist in our cultural mythos? The reason is twofold: money and curiosity. Very recently, a hunter from Las Vegas, oh yeah, it gets better, said he had done the impossible. He had captured and shot a Bigfoot creature, had DNA evidence to support the existence of it, and he was going to take this creature that he had preserved so perfectly with some help of some morticians and put it on tour, which is what he did do for about 6 months. He made about $60,000, was interviewed by countless reputable and not so reputable journalistic people, featured in newspapers, New York Times, London papers, etc. And then he came forward after that 6-month period and said it was a fake. And before then, everyone was like, oh my God, we have definitive evidence, this is great, everyone can shut up now. And he came forward and said it was a fake. And when asked why he did it, he said, I just made $60,000. Duh. I mean, come on. He's like, there's a sucker born every day, I just proved that, and I'm laughing all the way to the bank. Now, people who are supporters of Bigfoot who actually gave him money have tried to sue him to get the money back, but he actually committed no crime, so he can keep all $60,000. Yeah. Not suggesting you do that to pay for school. The second reason is that we as human beings have a natural desire to be curious, and that's one of the things that makes us uniquely human. Some psychologists go so far to say that is a basic human characteristic, this curiosity, and this curiosity has driven us to be uniquely human compared to our non-human primate cousins. We have culture, we have buildings, we have the ability to, get on our iPhones and play music or have FaceTime, etc. Curiosity is a great thing, because it really does drive us to be more evolved culturally and socially and mentally, but it also can lead us down the proverbial rabbit hole to pursue things that don't actually exist, and really does feed our need for supernatural ideas, ideology, things that go bump in the night, or in the case of Bigfoot, things that do not exist that are in the woods somewhere. So if you liked this talk, you should come to Zombie Nation. Anthropological and Biological Review of Zombies at the Discovery Museum on Saturday from 1 to 3. It'll be me and Dr. Lance Bowen giving a talk on zombies. And because my students always are told they have to have their references, here are mine.
Thank you so much. Do we have any quick questions? Yes. She asked if you believe in Bigfoot, where in North America would be the best place to find her?
Well, I personally don't believe in Bigfoot, not because I don't believe that Bigfoot can't exist. I believe in the scientific method, science, as you well know because you're in my phys ed class. There just isn't the evidence to support it. But based on the characteristics and everything else that everyone claims that Bigfoot has, the Pacific Northwest would probably be the best place. They say that he exists in the desert, but how many hairy people exist in the desert?
Isn't that what Burning Man is all about?
No comment.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that Bigfoot does exist, and he's 7'2", and he's got a shoe size of 22 inches, and he's a pro basketball player.
I have an ex-boyfriend who he actually legitimately calls Sasquatch because he's so hairy, and he calls himself that too, so I'm pretty sure that would be the closest we have.
Do we get to group our question because you pretty well filled in all the blanks? Okay. All right. Well, mine is if there really was Bigfoot, then where's the tracker dogs? The what? Tracker dogs. You know how you have hunting dogs? Oh, like, you know, if there really was, and he would have been found by now, they would have had tracker dogs out there.
None of the hair's been real.
Yeah. Yeah,
They
that's,
have to have a scent to find them.
yeah, that's, well, just the mind you know here was smell. Okay, if these things are really out there, they have this terrible smell.
Yeah. One of the names for it is a skunk monster, and they're known to smell like skunks. And I don't know about you, but my dog loves skunks as much as I hate
They
it.
tend to find them.
Oh yeah, she will find him, and out in the bush, I'm pretty sure she'd find Sasquatch if he was there.
So I
Could there have been any other reason that Bigfoot was created?
Yeah, there are cultural reasons. Like among Northwest Pacific Coast groups, he's known as a malevolent entity that will steal bad children away in the middle of the night. So it's kind of like a moral tale. Hey kids, don't be bad, or Bigfoot will eat you. You know, kind of like when your parents are like, "Don't be bad, Santa will not bring you toys, but bring you coal." So, gentlemen, in the hat.
Do you think it's a coincidence that all across the world we all believe in the same myth, or?
No, I don't. Again, it's in relation to cultural diffusion, this idea that, cultures come in contact and they share ideas. I mean, we see that a lot in all different cultures. And the fact that we see it in the Northwest Pacific Coast groups could be related to the fact that those groups did come originally from Asia and then came over the Bering Land Bridge and came into North America.
Adopted from heritage.
Yeah. But all the different mythos are different enough that they are unique. So, should we move on?
Yeah, we do have to move on.
My class emailed me.
Yes. Yeah, very sorry. We do have to move on. It's awesome that you guys are so interested in Bigfoot. I love Bigfoot. I really, no matter what you say, he's real. Okay, so, but next up we have Joe Hunt, English instructor, novelist. He's going to uncover the myths behind werewolves, mummies, maybe a little Frankenstein swamp thing, one of my favorites, and touch on vampires as well. Joe? Absolutely.
Hello, gang. That's right, leave for the exits.
No, our class is down here.
See if I care. Okay. Oh, yeah. I could make a little tiny funny joke and say I've been drinking blood all night. Isn't that pretty good? Pomegranate juice, it's almost the same thing. Yeah. Okay. So... All right, so if I walk around, I'll feel like I'm giving a TED Talk. You guys ever watch those things? But I'm really not that smart, so that's kind of a joke, too. Yeah.
What?
No, I'm fine. Or, okay, I guess that's not a bad idea. All right, sure. Thanks. All right, so I'm going to call mine the Canon of Monsters. Canon just meaning, the collection, the most famous ones. And how to break into it, a writer's perspective. I'll even say, I'm not a genius like Hugh, for example, at research, but I'm a writer, so I'm going to give, I'm even a little tiny secret. I'm even going to read a poem or two, before I'm over, all right? But, at the risk of everyone running for the exits again. I'll go like that. That'll be like the sound for... All right. So, and somebody... I'll say I might overlap a tiny, tiny bit, but I'll try not to. And hopefully I'll put in some new, shed some light additional also. So the first person or second person talked about this too, but it's kind of one of those fascinating secrets of history that Frankenstein and Dracula, the vampires, were almost born on the exact same day. So you heard before about they were in Geneva, 1816, the year without a summer, because there's some volcano, because of the ash, and so, yeah, but just it was totally cloudy the whole time. And so they were stuck indoors reading, ghost stories to each other. And she mentioned already Byron, that kind of stuff. So, good. A year without a summer. Oh, yeah, and here's the fun thing, kind of fun. We actually know, what book they were reading. So it's called Phantasmagoriana, Tales of the Dead. It's just a little collection of German scary ghost stories. And now this actually is kind of fun. Good. So, I'm not going to read the whole entire thing. It's pretty small text even for me, standing up here. But this is kind of fun. This is the very first story in there. And... I'll say it's kind of like there's a story within a story. Do you guys remember Jack Handey, Deep Thoughts? So one time he said, if you ever find out that what you're about to see is a play within a play, slow down, take a deep breath, and hold on for the ride of your life. Isn't that pretty good? I mean, it's kind of a joke that's, who cares, play within a play. Shakespeare does it, right? So but here's a story, so a story within a story. You read these, and you're almost surprised, like, kind of how mellow or slow or not very scary they are. It's kind of, one takeaway. You can find it on Amazon. It's almost dirt cheap because the copyright's gone. You can get it for free, basically. So, but here's the very first story. Some guy, Ferdinand, hops in a carriage. He's driving along. Then he gets some kind of spooky cottage. It's not that spooky. But he goes in, and so when he goes in, they're just sitting around, and it almost looks kind of like a seance, but it's not. So they're like, what's going on here? And the lady of the house says, we're all sitting around telling stories. Everyone is to relate a story of ghosts or something of a similar nature. And then she's like, do you have a story you could tell us too? And so he's like, yeah, that's at the bottom. See, I pointed with my foot. Do you promise to tell us a story too, sir? And he says, okay. He bows, and then it's enough of an answer. But isn't that kind of fun? It's like, the story they were reading was about people telling ghost stories, and same thing, then that was their idea too. So, and this isn't that important, but I'll waste like 1 minute and read us, what? Oh, sorry, go back. Oh, phew. Spoiler alert. Yeah, but here's some tiny little thing I wrote. Do you guys remember In Living Color, that TV show? Good. Remember there's an old guy that played guitar, and then he'd say, I wrote a song about it. Like to hear it? Here it go. So same thing, I wrote a poem about it. Like to hear it? Here it go. So I call this Nighthawks. And remember she started off by saying it was a dark and stormy night. So, all right. It was a drong and stormish night. Byron and Shelley, those incurable romantics, and friends were stuck indoors, the year without a summer, from volcanic fallout, telling ghost stories at Lake Geneva. Byron said, why don't we try writing some? Mary Shelley invented Frankenstein. John Polidori wrote The Vampire, which Bram Stoker basically copied. Well, I was going to get to that earlier because I said, they were kind of born the same day. So they had a friend, John Polidori, he's a doctor. The funny thing was the writers of the group didn't actually write anything that great. Shelley or Byron didn't come up with much. Oh, let me keep going. Wouldn't it be dreamy to think that Byron wrote something about werewolves and Shelley wrote something on mummies or swamp creatures? There are only 5 or 6 monsters. It's like the painting Nighthawks or Boulevard of Broken Dreams with Elvis, Marilyn Monroe, James Dean, and maybe Audrey Hepburn. Have you seen that painting before? I should have that on my slideshow too. No one else exists in the whole world. Maybe they'll go play pool when the bar closes. It's an exclusive club. I don't think a zombie is on the list, and I guess thinking that makes me the bouncer. Bounce. Even if the zombie raises hell, it is my job to put it back in its place. I wrote that a long time ago, so I'm not sure what it means. But the idea, but I like the idea. There's like, doesn't it seem like that all the time sometimes? There's only like 4 or 5 monsters in the whole world. Okay. So go ahead. Okay. Nice thing about this, like, nowadays we watch, I was thinking too, Thanos is going to be like the bad guy in Avengers 3, right? Good. So, but he looks like a big scary monster, basically. It's like, we see monsters even in superhero movies sometimes. So I was thinking, it's like, so just like Avengers, they had a Captain America movie, Iron Man movie, they build it up from scratch, right? Unlike DC, which is doing it backwards, they're going to have Justice League and then do individual. Good. So anyhow, so it's like, they had these huge, they had little individual films, and then they came together for one big, huge film. Good. Oh so here's Universal. So Universal Studios or Pictures, movies, whatever. So they kind of did a similar thing. I was going to say, back when we were watching that picture of Igor and the Hunchback, like almost their first monster movie was Quasimodo. And then they had Phantom of the Opera, which John is wearing, right? Oh, sorry, go back, sorry. I was pointing at you just because you're John. Good. All right, good. So anyhow, and then, so then they had, they had Lon Chaney and, all those famous guys. But, all right, so, go ahead. I had something else, but maybe it's not that important. Oh, do you guys know that Daniel Radcliffe, who played Harry Potter, like he's going to be in a Frankenstein movie he's being Igor. He's the part of Igor. So I'm kind of looking forward to that too. So just to say, someone mentioned it already, but it's like endless theme and variation. They just keep making these things over and over. Hugh said that. All right, so here's their, thing nowadays. And have you guys heard, they just had Dracula Untold, but they're going to do a Mummy movie next too. So basically Universal is going to try to reboot the whole franchise. like almost kind of like an Avengers thing, but yeah, they're going to do, and even they were going to do The Mummy first, but they already had the vampire Dracula Untold come out, so like, oh, they put something in at like the very end to try and make it transfer over a little bit and blend in with the other ones. Okay, so yeah, more visual evidence, right, good. Don't we all love The Simpsons? That's my favorite TV show. Okay. All right, oh yeah. When I was a kid, you guys remember eating those kind of cereals? Good. On The Simpsons one time, Mr. Burns, like, because Krusty is buying Krusty O's, and then Mr. Burns, he's like, where are the Burns O's? You know, as if he's like never been in a supermarket before. He doesn't know. Like, he needs to have to buy a cereal box with your picture on it, and so he buys Count Chocula as being the closest thing. So, okay, yeah, I already said this. Oh, good. So let me say, I worked at Twilight out. Sorry, I didn't work at Twilight. I worked at Amazon out in Fernley. Anybody else work at Amazon ever? You know, round of applause. Good. Was it kind of fun? No? It depends on what part you have, right? Were you a picker? Okay, me too. But I did gift wrap. So anyhow, but it's like, if you work at Amazon, this is maybe 10 years ago, before I started teaching, but if I saw a book go by often enough, I get it. You know, I wouldn't buy it necessarily. Maybe I'd read it while I was standing in Walmart, because I didn't have a lot of money back then either. So it's like, but I saw like some Stooky Stackhouse novels. And I was like, and back in the day, HBO didn't have a TV series on it yet. So back in the day, they were cartoons. Like, they have some little cartoon picture of a vampire. And I was like, these look interesting. So I picked them up and read some, and I was like, these are actually pretty good. You know, Anne Rice wrote vampire novels too. But anybody ever read the Stooky Stackhouse novels? Southern Vampire? Only one? All right, that's kind of disappointing. Have you seen the True Blood movie, or show at least, on HBO? Good. Yeah, there's nudity and violence, so maybe I like it more. Well, I don't know. All right, anyhow, so I thought it was pretty good. Good. All right, so then, yeah, I said already, infinite themes and variations, but I was thinking about it. Oh, yeah, but I worked there when Twilight first came out, and so I saw Stooky Stackhouse and the Twilight one, and I picked up Twilight too, and I started reading it, and I was like, this is terrible. I mean, I was just like, nah. You know, M-E-H, I was just like, forget it. So I read like the first chapter, and I was like, I don't need it. But then I have like 4 sisters, and they all read it. My mother read it, and my wife read it, and then it became really famous. So I read all 4. And really, and I'll say, so I teach, at Team CC and UNR, and I'll say, it drives me crazy just that she's so famous. She's she's a billionaire, by now. It's like, it drives me crazy just because you're reading her and you're like, wow, she's not Dostoevsky. It's like, how did she do it? Or how did she trick the whole world? But it is kind of, but I think she did a few things right. Sometimes I think she stole some ideas from True Blood too. But I think she had a few little interesting ideas. I like the idea where the boy sparkles. Isn't that kind of fun? Just that it's interesting and different. It's like, if you take, infinite themes and variations, we got to change stuff up a little bit too. And then I'll say too, so it's not just me, like, driving me crazy slightly. Here's a quote by Stephen King. Like, he weighed in on the subject too. And I said this was, we're still kind of on monsters, but I said this was a writer's perspective. So this is kind of what I think too. Oh yeah, but I have read them all now. I've read them all now. I read all 4 of them. Anyhow, but this is Stephen King talking. So he's comparing J.K. Rowling to her. In the case of Stephenie Meyer, he added, it's very clear she's writing to a whole generation of girls and opening up kind of a safe joining of love and sex in those books. It's exciting and it's thrilling, and it's not particularly threatening because they're not overtly sexual. A lot of the physical side of it is conveyed in things like the vampire will touch her forearm or run a hand over her skin. Remember the part where he comes in and just watches her sleep? Isn't that kind of creepy? My wife thought that was creepy. So, and she just flushes all hot and cold. And for girls, that's a shorthand for all the feelings that they're not ready to deal with yet. Isn't that pretty great? I think it's a pretty great quote and way to sum it up. And I could comment too, Stephenie, if I make fun of her a little bit, but she happens to be Mormon, I happen to be Mormon too. So, but it's almost Mormon doctrine slightly. It's like, there's no sex before marriage. Families can be together forever. They have like a little child also, Renesmee. Do you guys remember Renesmee? Like, I think that's the stupidest name in the whole world almost. It's like, we're combining Renee plus Esme. And it's like, that would work if it was like Mary Lou, but it still sounds dumb, So, all right. Okay. Oh, yeah. And I think to myself, too, is it Harry Potter next? Good. Can you believe it? I forgot to show us this picture while you're talking about her behind her back. It's like, I got to be talking in front of her back. All right. Yeah, all right. Okay, fair enough. Oh, good. So back to, maybe skip ahead one slide. Yes, good. So I do want to talk about, because Stephen King raised the specter of like comparing Stephanie Meyer, Twilight to Harry Potter. And I think to myself, it's like, I really think Twilight was kind of a fluke, just because she's not Dostoevsky. But, and here's the proof too, that it's like, she can't write any more books. Like, it's like, she's not full of ideas like the J.K. Rowling lady is full of ideas. She writes Casual Vacancy, she writes the detective one. Anyhow, but we haven't seen much, Stephanie Meyer stuff in a while. Remember I think she produced the movie Austenland. Anybody see Austenland? I actually read that book, and the book was okay, but I didn't love the movie. All right, but back to this then. So, Voldemort, and my original, title for this talk is if it's a TED Talk, right? So I'll call it a talk. So my title was The Canon and How to Break Into It. So I think to myself, okay, so on one hand, we're recycling the same old monsters, we always do. But on the other hand, every now and then, if you're a creative type, you try to think of some new monster, right? So it's like, so you wish, I swear I get tired of stuff. When people are like, hey, let's do a new Alice in Wonderland movie. One, I like Johnny Depp, so I think that's a fine movie. But it's like, can I think of a new idea, instead of doing the same, other ones again? Anyhow, but I'm like, good. So I'm like, but but Voldemort's fantastic. And it's like, and how do you create a monster? I like that he doesn't have a nose. That was like one of the, I don't know if it's in the movies versus the books. I read the books too, but it was a while ago. Anyhow, but he looks kind of like a snake, right? Isn't that pretty fantastic? If you're making a monster a little bit anthropomorphic. Is the next slide? No? Okay. At least I have the word there, anthropomorphic. It's like, sometimes you make him like the devil himself. Then go back to Voldemort if you would. You go backwards if you can. Good. How many? 3 minutes? I thought they said 20. All right. Okay. Maybe I'll skip ahead then. Okay. But isn't it pretty fantastic with the Horcruxes? It's like, if you killed somebody, it would make sense that a piece of your soul, that it does something to you. It's fantastic that he's like, I kill somebody, a tiny piece of my soul goes out, and then, all right, anyhow. Okay. So we don't really have time, I guess, for much else, but I'll do something else. So, no, so I have some more stuff too, but I'll see how much it takes. Okay. All right. Anyhow, just speaking of like the creation of new monsters, I have two little tiny, the first one I'll read. I didn't write it. Well, how long do you think this will take to read? If I have 3 minutes, can I do two things, one or the other? No, only one thing? I swear I thought I had more time. All right. Okay. Anyhow, I wrote a book myself. All right? So I could put it up on the overhead, or I could show it like this. Have you guys seen that Bob Dylan thing, Johnny's in the Basement, where he drops like little papers from his stomach? Okay. So I wrote a book called Felix and the Fog Monster. I was talking a second ago about creating your own monster. So here's like me trying to create my own monster. Right? I said from a writer's perspective. If I knew I didn't have that much time, I wouldn't have read the first poem because it wasn't that great. But this one I think is better. All right. So, and I could tell you, I was going to read another poem called Liver Pill by a poet named James Tate. If you like poetry, the guy James Tate's a genius. Like I went to school back east in Massachusetts just because this guy taught there. He was like the laziest teacher ever. But the poem, Liver Pill. All right. You could follow, I don't know. You could follow me on Twitter, Joe X Hunt. I'm also running for office too. Isn't that kind of scary? That's something scary. I'm running for state senate. I'm not going to win, so it's not that scary. All right. So I wrote a book called Felix and the Fog Monster. Here's the first picture. Can we see it in the back? Yeah? All right, because I could put it on the overhead, but I like it better this way. Okay. So Felix Cube was racking his brain, wondering what to be for Halloween, walking home from school through the fog with his friend Nora. I'm already 8, he told Nora, so I feel like I've been everything. A vampire, a werewolf, a mummy. What else is there? I need something new and interesting. And he asked his friend Nora, what are you going to be? A hobo like you are every year? I actually had a friend when I was a kid who was a hobo every year. So she says, She said, I am never a hobo. I just have really bad luck. Okay. Say like this is like the slowest 3 minutes ever. So, when I'm when I'm a mermaid, my tail gets run over by cars. When I'm a princess, my costume gets eaten by that stupid dog, Mangy. So for some reason he likes to eat her costume. Okay. When Felix was alone, he heard a voice behind him say, "Psst, I know what you... Oh, yeah. And this voice, it comes from... I was listening to Frankenstein, the book on tape one time. This is where I get that voice. All right? So it's not even my own. It says, "Psst, I know what you can be for Halloween. A fog monster." And so he says, "Fog monster? I don't think that exists. I never heard of them." And then he says, "But they do." You already saw that picture. "But they do. That's what I am. I know it's not a vampire, or I know it's not as famous as a vampire or a mummy, but that's why it's new and interesting. I can even help you make your costume. We can use dry ice for the fog." "Okay," said Felix, "you got yourself a deal." "Maybe you could even get your friends to be fog monsters too." "No," said Felix, "they always buy their costumes from the Acme Halloween costume store." Okay, but that Halloween, no one was trick-or-treating. For 2 or 3 reasons. Number 1, there was too much fog, so all the little kids were afraid that the big kids would steal their candy. Did that ever happen to you guys when you were kids? It happened to me one time, I swear, even they drive by in a truck and try to steal it, so you have to put your candy bag over here. Well, no, I hit somebody's head with my pillowcase full of candy. So, let's see. Yeah, number 1, there's too much fog, little kids scared. Reason number 2, the truck that was supposed to bring the costumes to the Acme Halloween costume store was stuck out on the highway because the fog was too thick. Then Nora said, "I have an idea. I could be Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. With my nose so bright, I could find the way through the fog. That would save Halloween." Felix said, "I have a better idea." And he got a megaphone so he could, talk to everybody. "Children of the neighborhood, we can all be fog monsters. I'll even help you make your costumes. We can use dry ice for the fog." So Halloween was saved. All the children were fog monsters. The fog monster, and they said, "Good work, congratulations." Something like, they're excited for Felix. It's written down over there, but so they're like, "Thank you." But he said, "But it wasn't my idea. The fog monster's real." And the fog monster had never been happier that all the children were dressed like him. All the children except for Nora. So she went as a reindeer princess, and sure enough, it happened again that stupid dog Mangy ate her costume. The reason was this: Mangy had really bad eyesight. And he thought that and he ate, and his brand of dog food was princess brand dog food. So he thought, which is kind of a stretch because it doesn't really exist, but there's princess cat food, right? So it must be the same company. So princess brand dog food, and thought that she was his dog food. So Nora is crying as she's walking home, dressed like a hobo. You see the label, hobo. And then she hears a voice behind her say, "Little girl, I know what you can be for Halloween instead of a hobo." And she says, "What's that?" She turns around and sees her dress and her crown, which just got eaten, floating in midair. And then the voice says, "The ghost of things eaten by dogs." And then Nora says, "What? Never heard of it. I don't think that exists." The end.
Thank you. How fun from a writer's perspective, right? How exciting. And for our last panelist, I'd like to welcome John Adlish to the stage, or to the panel. I'm actually very excited about this because he's going to expose the microscopic monsters within. Is that what it is? Yes. That cause people the great deal of fear. So, I'm personally very excited about this. If you guys could just stick around for a little while longer and we'll wrap this up.
Make it scary. Yeah, I'm going to make it scary. Okay, so I'm Dr. Adlish. I teach microbiology here, but I also spend a lot of time in the Amazon jungle doing infectious disease. So I'm going to show you some of the things that I have in my own work, but I put this into perspective of traveling monsters because, well, you see why. And I'm going to introduce you to probably the monster that has killed more people in the history of the world. This is a real thing, too. In the history of the world than anything, and shaped not only continents, but history and everything as well. So let's start out with this. So you look at this nice little gerbil mouse, whatever he is, rat. Looks cute, right? But he carries a bacterium down here called Leptospira. And Leptospira is something that put this particular gentleman into a coma. Severe meningitis, because Leptospira is actually carried in the urine of rats, animals, dogs. It's all over different countries, but particularly in developing nations, you see high rates of this. This is actually one of the patients that we worked on who came down with it. Next one would be, we're talking about monsters. These are things that travel. We'll come back to this. This is a bat. Can you get rid of that? So this is why I wanted the lights down, because this is actually this is a tree in the Amazon forest. This is the rainforest, so you can see over here there's a little patch of the sun. But this is a bat. This is a tarantula. So they're traveling, but they, especially this one, can also carry certain things. Ooh, there's another traveling kind of monster. But let's get back to the world of the ones that are really severe. So if you can't see this cartoon, it says, "Sorry, the GSOH in my ad stood for got syphilis on holiday." Tertiary syphilis. Bacterial infection. This is also a spirochete. This is carried from, person to person, direct contact, sexual contact. This is actually, probably should scare you more than Bigfoot. Because if you get this and you get into the tertiary phase, you're pretty well done. So not really common anymore because we were able to diagnose things quickly now. But here's another traveling thing, the tick. Ticks carry lots of things. So in the United States, we have a very, very small bacterium that's known as Rickettsia rickettsii, which is right here. These are the bacteria inside host cells in our cells, and they cause Rocky Mountain spotted fever. So this person is bleeding from their capillaries because they have been bitten by a tick, and they have this particular infection, which is Rocky Mountain spotted fever. We've moved these around because of our ability now to move things around the world. We've moved these things around really, really well. For example, you may have heard of Lyme disease. Lyme disease is transmitted by ticks. Those ticks used to be isolated in the East Coast because Lyme disease started in Lyme, Connecticut. But now we have these ticks out here. So we do have Lyme disease as well. But this one right here, which is a mosquito, has killed billions of people in the history of the world. This is probably the worst monster you can come in contact with. Mosquitoes have not only shaped the world, but they have destroyed civilizations. And I'll just show you a couple of examples. So just to fill you in on some biology, it is only female mosquitoes that bite because they need a blood meal to incubate the larvae that they carry. This is the Anopheles mosquito, by the way, which is carrying malaria. This is actually a patient of ours in Peru. This is the malaria parasite, which is a protozoan, so this is their blood. And we're looking at this particular parasite here. And the reason I show you malaria is because every year in the world there are millions of cases of malaria. Last year there were 660,000 deaths from malaria. And yet we're really up in arms about a couple of people in the U.S. that got Ebola. The Ebola outbreak is pretty bad in Africa, which we'll talk about. But malaria is something that is really significant. This is another slide from one of the patients that I was looking at who had a different form of malaria, which is the worst kind that people die from. This is a child with malaria, so she's now a little jaundiced. Eyes are yellow. She's supposed to be brown. She's kind of yellow. This is a woman who had cerebral malaria. That's the problem, is once it gets into the brain, then you have high mortality rate and it's difficult to treat. So she did not make it. Pregnant woman with malaria because it crosses the placental barrier. And we can go on to some parasitic worms. Well, they travel too. They might just travel in you. This is a small intestine of an animal harboring a worm called Ascaris lumbricoides. These are the eggs. And all around the world, these eggs are in water supplies, in the soil, contaminated, rivers. Mainly developing countries have issues with this. We have some cases in the United States. But these are the eggs that will live in the soil for quite a long time. is a child with a belly full of worms. So it's not because I work in South America. It's not because, those people in Latin America are lazy. You don't feel too good if you've got a belly full of worms, hundreds of worms blocking your small intestine. So we actually treated him. He came out fine. A couple of days later, he was playing soccer. Again, these are the eggs of Ascaris, this worm that you find in the soil. So this is actually in a sample that we looked at. This is a guy who's smiling because, well, why wouldn't you smile if you had a belly full of worms, right? He's smiling because he's going to have them taken out surgically. So one of my friends goes in there, cuts him open, starts pulling out handfuls of worms, right? If you work in the medical profession and you think you've seen everything, you should go into surgery when they're pulling out thousands of worms, flopping around on the floor, You don't wear your Crocs to work that day. So, but he came out just fine as well. Then you keep a couple for samples, right? Hey, I got a trophy. Ooh. Okay, now, I don't smoke, and I tell my students they probably shouldn't smoke, but this is one case where I have to admit smoking was beneficial. So this is a guy who was bitten by a particular large insect. I don't even know what they are, neither do any of the other doctors I work with, but was bitten by this large insect, lays eggs in there that are actually going to hatch into larvae as worms. And he had 2 of them in his forearm. So what you're looking at is his forearm. And he came to the hospital, and of course nobody wants to just, cut your forearm, 19 centimeters long and start taking out worms. So the first thing that we did was to go and make a small incision and see if we could just pull them out. Because every time we put in some tweezers or forceps, then the worm would move down. And he had 2 of these. They were pretty good sized. This went on for hours. So we actually injected, drugs that are supposed to irritate the worms, cause them to move. They would keep going deeper and deeper, which you don't want because they could go to the bone. So one of our pathologists, who was raised in the jungle, very far from the city where we work, said, there's this old legend that you can get rid of these worms by cigarette smoke. So, like, really? How do you know that? And he goes, well, I quit smoking recently, but I just happened to have a pack of cigarettes in the lab, which have been there for a long time. This is sort of a running joke with all of us. So he starts smoking, he starts blowing the smoke on here, nothing happens. He goes, well, that doesn't work. Wait a minute. So he wrapped the patient's arm with plastic, like saran wrap, and started to blow the smoke into, the saran wrap, put a little hole in there, blew the smoke in there, and then he kept doing that, and it built up in the concentration, and lo and behold, the worms came out. And so then we pulled them out, put them in a jar. Okay? Another creature that travels. Sometimes those worms, these are different worms, can travel to the brain. This is actually a tapeworm encysted in the brain. Let's talk about some viral infections, because remember that little mosquito I showed you that's not only carrying malaria, but they're going to carry lots of viruses. So this is one of the culprits. This is Aedes aegypti. This particular mosquito, again, comes out. Female mosquitoes bite. These mosquitoes come out in the daytime. The mosquitoes that cause malaria come out in the evening. These are electron micrographs of dengue fever virus, which now is sweeping the planet. Last year there were you're going to love this, there were over 50 million cases of dengue fever. 50 million cases. The problem with dengue is on a second exposure, you could come down with what's called dengue hemorrhagic fever, which is where you start bleeding from all of your capillaries. That's where we have trouble. So here's a patient that had dengue hemorrhagic fever. Looks like he's got a sunburn, right? All this red here, again, he's supposed to be brown. This is blood. This is all blood. All his capillaries have burst. He's healing, though, because these little red spots tell us that he's actually starting to plug up the capillaries that have been burst, and he is healing. He's getting better. But if you look at this, this is from a female patient. You see this darker color here. Is this going to work for me? You see this darker color here. And her legs, actually, this doesn't come out on the projector, but if you look at the computer screen, she's almost purple because all of her capillaries are bursting. Painful. You're losing blood. You can't treat patients with this kind of a problem with pain medication that is also a blood thinner because you'll kill them. So she started to recover, though. You can see the little white spots, which means, oh, that's good. That's what we want to see. She's recovering. But a lot of people die from dengue, hemorrhagic fever because of those mosquitoes. Ooh. So let's get something bigger. This is just, I don't know why I put this in here. I thought it was cool. But here's a tarantula. This is a tarantula wasp. This tarantula is a medium-sized Amazon tarantula, so it's probably only about 10 inches in diameter. And this wasp is about 3 inches long. And she has bitten the tarantula and is dragging, I have a video of this actually, she's dragging the tarantula across the Amazon floor and lays her eggs in there while the tarantula is alive. And the eggs, hey, you want to see some real monsters, right? And the eggs will go ahead and hatch into larvae, and they will eat the tarantula while it's alive from the inside out. Pretty cool, huh? Ebola. So we were having this little Ebola thing. First of all, do not think that you're going to die from Ebola. You have a much higher likelihood of being killed by a rampant pumpkin on Halloween. Okay? This is very hard to get from person to person, and I'm actually kind of sparing some of the disease is really gruesome. You probably don't want to see those. But we're talking about traveling, right? Viruses, bats. Even though those of us in infectious disease say, we're not willing to commit to exactly what the reservoir is. That means where the virus is normally found in nature. We're pretty sure it's these guys. And it can get into other animal populations. Now, different countries do different things with bats. And bats go and they eat different things, and they can get this virus into the general population. This is a really, actually mild hemorrhaging from Ebola. So when you think about the people in Texas that were contaminated, you don't want to be around somebody who is in the last stages of Ebola. I mean, they're bleeding literally everywhere, and it's horrible. I mean, their tissues are coming out, and it's not a very good thing to see. So it's difficult to transmit from person to person. Really difficult. You've got to come in contact with this stuff. Or you've got to come in contact with their tissues, or maybe their urine or vomit. But when Ebola patients are vomiting, they're vomiting up tissue with blood in it. So it's really difficult to get. So I thought, well, this is Halloween, and this is a big thing. And I was telling my class, I'm having really an enjoyable time in the morning watching all of the politicians in the United States Congress now are experts in science because they've read 2 tweets over Ebola virus. It's pretty, and as a scientist who is, and I'm a specialist in infectious disease, it's pretty funny to watch people who know absolutely nothing, zero, less than nothing, and the journalists start commenting on the fact that we have these 2 healthcare workers in Texas. Oh my God, it's going to take over. No, it's not. We have this thing called science. And if you want to test it, the next time a vampire comes at you, just shoot him with a wooden stake. There's the experiment, right? So the last one is, this is a colored electron micrograph. We color these by computerized. But this is a child in intensive care with Ebola, and you can see, massive bleeding. This is actually, like I said, one of the milder pictures of people that are dying from this disease. But this is what the virus looks like. It's a huge virus, but it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't get transmitted easily. So this is just sort of some, introduction into the traveling monsters that you might think about, and these are the real ones. Like I said, malaria and dengue fever, they're killing millions of people, and they're causing hundreds of millions of sickness cases every year. So I thank you for coming, and if you have any questions, go ahead and ask. No questions? John?
You said Ebola does not kill.
No, I said Ebola is hard to get. It kills quickly and easily. It's really bad. But it's difficult to get from person to person transmission. So direct transmission or direct contact from person to person, you must come in contact with bodily fluids that are full of the virus. Or you could be bitten by one of the bats. Yeah, but our bats don't have that in the U.S. These are only certain countries. Yeah, question?
Yes, why do they get certain diseases, say from mosquitoes? Is it purely because they're in their environment or unsanitary conditions? Or?
No, and that's a good question, and most people think of that like, oh, those people in Africa and South America, it's unsanitary conditions. The Amazon basin, the Amazon jungle is huge. I've even had some students who say, why don't they spray for mosquitoes? Seriously? I mean, really? 6% of the Amazon basin has been mapped. 6%. So when you get into these environments, mosquitoes feed on animal populations. If you've been to the Amazon or you've been to Africa and you have massive animal populations, I work in Peru. In Peru in the Amazon, we have 7 different species of monkeys. I mean, there are so many species of jaguars and pumas and large animal populations that mosquitoes feed on. So, these are what we call reservoirs. So these viruses get into these animal populations, and it's a vicious cycle. They go from the animal to the mosquito, back to different animals, back to the mosquitoes. And that's why I say mosquitoes are responsible for lots of things. Just to give you a quick story, I love history. I love presidential history, and Thomas Jefferson is one of my favorite presidents, but he's overcredited because he didn't really get the Louisiana Purchase through swift and really good. But that's, we don't want to say that about one of our presidents. He got the Louisiana Purchase because of yellow fever. And Napoleon had his troops stationed in the Caribbean ready to come and invade the United States because the French owned a third of our country. And they started coming down with yellow fever. And Napoleon, wrote to Jefferson because he couldn't text him and said, hey, my soldiers are dying down here from yellow fever, and that middle part of your country is a yellow fever infested swamp. You're never going to get rid of it. So you pay me a few $1 million because I got other wars that'll be more productive, and I'll go away. And that's how we got a third of our country. The Panama Canal, we were the ones who were able to get rid of yellow fever to take over the Panama Canal from the French. So we finished the Panama Canal. Did that change the world? Absolutely. But it wasn't because of engineering. It was because of the Yellow Fever Commission in the United States that figured out how to get rid of that particular problem. Quetzalcoatl. When in Peru, Pizarro conquered Peru. You can't conquer the Inca Empire with 187 Spaniards with guns that take you 4.5 minutes to load. You can't do it. But you can do it if you bring smallpox. So if you come to that country and your people are carrying smallpox because they've been recovering from it, and you give it to an indigenous group of people who have never seen smallpox, and it works both ways. The Europeans got syphilis from the New World. So, you come and you bring your smallpox, and what did Quetzalcoatl in Mexico, and what did the Inca do? They said, well, we especially Mexico, we can't beat your God because your God's more powerful than our God because our people are dying from smallpox and your people aren't. Okay, you can take the country. You can't defeat the Inca Empire with a handful of soldiers. You've got to have the help of smallpox, which they did. These are all things that have changed the world. So, we're constantly in this battle of trying to take care of infectious disease.
How would you know if you had tapeworm or some, worm type of virus or specimen in your body?
Well, if you have a tapeworm in your intestines, then they're actually fairly easy to diagnose. I could just poke you in the same spot every day for 3 days, and it'll hurt. But usually with the tapeworms, they're going to break. They're long. They're going to break parts of their body called proglottids, and they're going to come out in the stool, and you'll probably see those. But you're not going to get skinny, or you're not going to have all those things. Tapeworms have been living in humans for thousands of years. Just when you get too many of them or they get too big, then you have problems. So, other questions?
You made a joke.
I know you.
You made a joke about the Ebola. The chances of getting it is less than getting hit by a rope pumpkin or something like that. What's the percentage of getting hit by a rope pumpkin?
Yeah, I think that's, for you? For you, I think, yeah. No, because I'm thinking, I may just go back and get a pumpkin and huck it at you as you come in. No, I'm just teasing. All right, you guys. No more questions? All right, thank you. John, thanks.
Thank you all so much for joining us. Keep a lookout for next year. We're going to be back again. Thomas will put this whole shindig together. What a great way to end it, on the real diseases that may kill you. Hey, have a good Halloween.